Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, January 8th, 2024. I am getting close to actually reverting back and accidentally saying 2023 again, but it's not. If it were, I don't know. Nothing in particular would happen, but it's 2024. It's an election year that puts us 1 week. I don't know if that appropriately conveyed the sense of dread and revulsion, but yes, 1 week from Republican caucuses in Iowa, which, doesn't make a great deal of difference to the rest of us, of course, but that means it's all starting again, which is, lousy news just in general. This year proves to be, unlikely to be a real fun time dealing with Donald Trump again, if in fact we eventually do have to deal with him, and we'll have to deal with him in some way or another, even if it's just the backlash of dealing with him and his base reacting to being told, no, you can't run for president, which who knows whether we'll ever get to there. But at any rate, here we are, beginning of January, and already having to dread the end of 2024. But well, that's just sort of the way history goes these days. Anyway, plenty to catch up on after the weekend. This is actually our first Monday show of the year, given that New Year's Day was a Monday, and we skipped that one with the live show. But I guess we'll be able to stretch the festivities out because we'll be back here on Wednesday saying, hey, it's our first live Wednesday show of the year. Because whatever. We decided to celebrate the new year by not coming into work, which is, generally speaking, what you'd usually do. We decided to do it on, something like Eastern Orthodox New Year's Day instead, and here we stand. Okay, so let's see. Plenty of things happening over the weekend. We'll decide which of them are the most important. Greg Dworkin has his stories, his raft of stories all lined up. Wow, 28 entries today, so that should be something. What's on Justice's mind? This is also a good way of starting. Okay. Right. Elise Stefanik put herself back in the news, I guess with an appearance on the Sunday shows, and during which she refused to commit to accepting the results of the 2024 election, which was, I guess, was a bit of a, oh my gosh, shocking moment on the Sunday shows, although there was also a lot of criticism for the lack of follow-up in that. But the more I think about it, the less I think it was even a helpful question. You put a question like that to somebody like Elise Stefanik or Trump, for that matter, there's almost a grain of truth thing somewhere in there. Ask them, will you accept the results of the election? From their perspective, of course, they say, I don't know what the results of the election are or how we got to them. And I could see where someone like Stefanik, who's looking to stir the pot, would consider it an acceptable answer to say, well, we'll see. We'll see whether there's cheating and lying and stealing going on, in which case I probably won't accept the results of the election. And neither should you, except I would accept them if they were in favor of Donald Trump. And, a principled person would say, well, I'm upset about the lying and cheating and stealing. We should do something about it. But anyway, here we are trying to sort this one out and getting agitated about whether or not the follow-up was adequate. But, let's see. I'm getting some notes here. Okay. It was a different question, apparently, that lacked follow-up. I lacked follow-up on watching the whole thing because, I don't do that. But anyway, Greg says he's got the whole thing covered. He's aware of every internet situation like John McCain was. And, all right, so it's a different, okay. Yes. Elise Stefanik also making waves over the weekend with her comment about January 6th, people who are, being prosecuted for their activities on January 6th, some of whom still in prison or serving sentences, because they've been convicted of their activities on January 6th. she referred to as January 6th hostages, which I guess somehow that too warranted no follow-up, and that's a problem. And given that there's there's always somewhere some real-life hostage situation playing out, but she had just made tremendous waves, remember, Stefanik, in attacking the presidents of the Ivy League universities who were foolish enough to answer the call to come and testify in front of Congress to be embarrassed and harassed out of their jobs afterwards. And the topic of that inquiry, of course, well, what are you going to do about all the horrific anti-Semitism sprouting up on campuses as people, well, protest the war that's going on between Israel and Hamas in Gaza? And, the old trope, essentially, of conservative Israel supporters insisting that all criticism of Israel is actually anti-Semitism. Then, of course, mixed with, well, I think there's some real anti-Semitism mixed with the anger over the conditions and the war itself. So there's always that. Some people are out there for completely different, not necessarily completely different reasons, but very different motivations and different willingness to say different horrific things versus others. But they made a big deal out of it being across the board anti-Semitism because there was leverage in that. And then, just weeks later to be saying, well, that people who are actually convicted of crimes connected to the insurrection are hostages. Whereas, oh yeah, I forgot. I was just talking about that other horrific situation. There was something about, I don't remember. We were trying to protect some people or something. And anyway, I don't care about any of them. So I think that was part of the problem as well. So we got that going on. And plenty more fallout from that. I guess it's all connected, really. Everybody just making more mess out of the same story with these university presidents. So Greg's here. Let's sort it all out because he says he's got it covered. Let him do it. Good morning, Greg. How are you?
Hey, good morning.
Hey.
You see? I do let you speak.
Yeah, right. I know.
Okay, that's it for the hour.
It's all over. And please get rid of that second hour.
Absolutely. So there is a big overarching theme here.
There is.
Today is January 8th, or we like to think of as January 6th adjacent. We didn't have a show on January 6th just because of the timing.
Yeah, so we weren't under attack.
We're actually going to start with Mitt Romney.
Well, he was there.
Yeah, he's in it too, because he's a jerk. And let me tell you why.
Oh, well, yeah, there's also that. I mean, I'm thinking about the other part where he was just like, "Oh my God, they're going to murder me."
Yeah, well,
I better get out of here.
Remember that part? He apparently doesn't remember that part.
Exit stage left. Yes.
He told
what?
Snagglepuss. He told the New York Times that the democracy push is a bust after Biden's speech.
The democracy push is okay. Oh, well, he killed
January
it.
6th will be 4 years old by the election. People have processed it one way or the other, Romney told the newspaper. Biden needs fresh material, a new attack, rather than kicking a dead political horse. So, he could have just said the same thing about abortion and he'd be just as wrong. In other words, mainstream Republicans, who are a tiny sliver of the party these days.
All right.
Right? Think this is all about taxes.
Taxes?
Everybody else in the real world is saying, what are you talking about?
I mean,
the Republican Party is centering January 6th because they're trying to rewrite history. That's half of what Elise Stefanik was doing when she was on Kristen Welker's Meet the Press talking about a reference to January 6th hostages.
Yes.
First of all, she wants to make it sound like it was, I think it was Andy Clyde who said, they were just tourists walking through and all of that. Wow. She's taking that point of view. That's part of it. And part of it, of course, is that she's desperately running to be vice president for Donald Trump. And therefore makes everything he says. And that's one of the reasons why she said that. And the reference to hostages, given the Israel-Hamas situation with high-level hostage taking and negotiations going on. It was no accident. and a reference to that was no accident. And literally, she's running for vice president. But it was a horrible thing to say, and it was, complete dropping the ball by Welker for no follow-up on that.
I guess she probably. I wonder if it even registered with her. I mean, I know sometimes under the lights,
the point is
hard to hear the other person.
Is absolutely, positively central to what Republicans are doing, and Romney's wrong. Of course, it's central to what Biden is doing for a completely different reason. This was an insurrection, and Trump and everybody who participated in it needs to get their due process and then get punished in various and sundry ways.
Yeah, I don't know what Mitt Romney thinks he's up to, although I don't know what. So it's all about taxes? Like, was that?
Well, he's always
really
about
say
taxes.
So. I mean, I guess he
didn't say, "Oh, this is about taxes." It's just it's Mitt Romney.
Okay, I'm just wondering because sometimes they'll say it explicitly.
Mitt Romney exists to have lower taxes. I mean, look, this is a guy whose political judgment said, "Let me get Donald Trump's endorsement so I can go and lose to Barack Obama." But I'm going to give Joe Biden advice about how to run presidential elections. He won. I lost. I was a Trump supplicant. And then I, of course, voted to impeach him. And my experience is that here's what you should do, Joe. And, basically Biden is looking at him and saying, you lost, I won. How about no?
Well, okay. That's a decent reaction. Well, Stefanik really, it is. It's quite astonishing, I guess, what she's up to. The only thing I can say about Welker is she might have been stunned into she didn't just say,
she's stunned every week.
I guess so. That's the problem. I mean, it's an issue.
Follow-up.
You understand how it could happen once, but then you're like, well, this is your profession. We're paying you a lot of money. You do this all the time, every week. You eventually going to have to listen to what they say.
You're supposed to have the follow-up figured out with the whiteboard coming up and saying, but here's where you said. Yeah. That's your job.
Right. But like myself, I could see being dropped into the job, I guess, for a week. I'd be like, I could see myself going on and going, wait a minute, did you say hostages? Because it's a word that gets, it's used in the news and people say things and then wait a minute, you mean the people convicted of the insurrection?
The people
Holy
who
cow.
had due process and then were in jail because they were found guilty in a court of law?
I mean, what are we trading for these hostages, by the way? What do we get out of this? Anything? I mean, just if we wanted to call it that.
Nice democracy you have here.
I guess.
If something happened to it.
I don't know.
But again,
what are my demands?
The centrality of January 6th to what Republicans are doing is key to understanding now through November, just as it is, of course, with
it's always
the Democrats.
January 6th.
Now, Democrats make their own mistakes. They have their own Mitt Romneys. They have all the unnamed people in newspapers saying they shouldn't spend so much time talking about abortion in January 6th. We need to talk about kitchen table issues.
Like who's the president of a university none of us went to.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, so, okay.
Now, that gets complicated because it's Axel Springer who owns Business Insider. That's a German company. Axel Springer himself was a publisher who wasn't a Nazi, but, in those days, everything was complicated in Germany. And he was Nazi adjacent. He had to accommodate them in order to keep his business open and so on and so forth. What I'm trying to say is that Germany has a really complicated issue with anti-Semitism going forward as they work to try to reconcile themselves with the past. If you have somebody accused, Business Insider, of somehow or other, what happened is that we had this rich guy who has this wife who happens to. This rich guy has been criticizing Harvard and was part and parcel of how the Harvard head of Harvard, Claudine Gay, was kicked out over plagiarism complaints. It turns out his own wife, when she was in academia, apparently also plagiarized from Wikipedia. And Bill Ackman, the rich guy who started all of this and who's married to the person accused of plagiarizing Wikipedia, says, wait a minute, you can't go after my wife. That's ridiculous. People make mistakes. And besides, Wikipedia isn't copyrighted, so what are you even talking about? And a whole bunch of stuff. Business Insider broke the story. Axel Springer owns Business Insider. Ackman complained, And now Axel Springer is going to investigate whether Business Insider was correct in writing this story.
I mean,
why?
You want to look.
Because the whole issue originally brought up was we have to get rid of Claudine Gay because of anti-Semitism. That's where Germany's complicated history of anti-Semitism comes in. You can't make a charge like that and just have them drop it. They have to investigate it.
I see.
In their own way.
Because they feel bad?
Yes.
So Business Insider does, I guess, Acker's bidding essentially and helping push out.
No, Business Insider reports that Acker's wife was a plagiarist, and what is Acker doing?
Right. So
Acker doesn't like it. So Acker complains. Business Insider broke the story, so he complains, and Axel Springer, a conservative German company that owns Business Insider, decides, okay, I'm listening to what Acker's complaining about. Let me investigate my own company.
Does Acker say Business Insider is anti-Semitic for targeting my family?
No, but he doesn't need to.
Oh.
It's all built in.
Oh. Well, I think you should say
right?
it.
And
Go
so
for
at
it.
the same time.
Let me hear you say it.
Yeah, and it's a complicated situation.
Oh, it is.
Everybody was shocked that all of a sudden Axel Springer's investigating Business Insider. Why? They have a history of hard-hitting stories against rich people.
Well,
why all of a sudden are you investigating this?
Because isn't this a story about rich people? Sure. Well, let's investigate the investigation.
Right. Why are we investigating the investigation? What is the impetus for this? At the same time, this guy, Bill Acker, the rich guy, is also pushing to investigate everybody at MIT, everybody who's ever done anything, drop him on AI platforms and see whether any of them ever plagiarized.
Oh, I see. What? And we're still worried about plagiarism?
But leave my wife alone. Leave her out of it.
So.
She's got nothing to do with it.
All right. So investigate everybody at MIT, even though she was at MIT?
You know, they were one of the three people, Penn, MIT, and Harvard.
Oh, I see.
Penn and Harvard lost their presidents. MIT is still there.
Yes. But talk about complicated. So you want to investigate everybody at MIT for plagiarism.
MIT was the one that was behind the whole Business Insider story.
But she was. The accusation is his wife was plagiarizing.
I'm just trying to explain to you. This is a
weird
conspiracy.
Yeah.
And for some reason, Axel Springer says, "Oh, there must be something there. Let me investigate."
I guess. I don't know. Maybe they just figured they'd placate him, or whether they really think I don't know. Because he just ruined Harvard, I guess. So he figured he might ruin us. I don't know. I guess so. Yeah, because he's rich. That's what's driving. How is he going to investigate everybody at MIT? Well, because he's rich and he can just pay somebody to say, go, I don't know, say you investigated them and then say some number of professors plagiarized. Meanwhile, the other complication is, so his wife he's mad because Business Insider said his wife plagiarized. His wife was an academic at MIT. So it's kind of weird that you come around to, well, that's right. We should investigate everybody at MIT for plagiarism. I know, that's what we said.
Somebody at MIT broke this story against me.
Yeah, I guess. So they were all, okay. So we'll find out which one of them plagiarized the story about me plagiarizing.
Yeah.
I get it. Okay. Meanwhile, as it turns out,
something. You know, it's you can go down the rabbit hole forever.
Crap.
I'm not going to. I'm just saying it's complicated.
Okay, well, we won't, but let me just throw out one other thing that I saw people discuss overnight. So his wife is, well, obviously it's anti-Semitism because she's Israeli, so boom, there you go, obviously. But the other thing was she's mixed up in Jeffrey Epstein story, as it turns out. She's got a history. When she was a professor at MIT, she solicited a $125,000 donation from Epstein, like post conviction, was dispatched by MIT to go court him for donations, which is pretty amazing.
The media lab at MIT was really tied up with Epstein post conviction, and that's yet another different scandal.
Is it?
Yeah.
Well, maybe it is. Maybe
Epstein,
it's not.
Don't believe anything unless you read it in the Miami Herald from Julie K. Brown.
Okay, I'll wait for her to tell us about it, although it happened in Massachusetts, so they might not get around to it. But okay, as it turns out, there's definitely some sort of connection there, because at some point MIT made a big apology and they put out some sort of statement about it. There is and was an Epstein connection, and she was that connection. So that's not going to work out that well.
And the head of the Media
either.
Lab had to resign. I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff going on there.
Yeah. Fun. But it seems like everybody's connected to Epstein, so maybe it's all plagiarism.
Right. So
just one guy.
How that plays into
we'll never know.
The Business Insider's story on Bill Acker's wife, how Bill Acker plays into the stories about plagiarism that toppled the Harvard president, how all of that is wrapped in with anti-Semitism accusations are complicated. That's all.
Yes, all right. Is there anything else happening anywhere in the world?
Well, yeah. So we got to get back to this January 6th stuff.
I knew it.
Because that's really the center of all of this. This, Bill Acker story with his wife and plagiarism and all that story is kind of a sideshow. And, yeah, most of us don't really wake up every day saying, gee, I wonder what's going on at Harvard.
That's true.
I think what's much more important, if you want to look at education, it's probably more important to look at what's going on at the new school in Florida and at LSU in Louisiana, LSU? Where the governor is basically pushing to get rid of diversity and trying to change the model about how history is taught and to be
who cares
simple about it in these schools. And so, that to me is a much bigger story about what's going on at Penn and Harvard and MIT.
Sure. But at the same time, I'm an elite newspaper, so it isn't.
Yeah. Anyway.
Yes.
January 6th happens. Stefanik says what she says. Romney says what he says. Joe Biden has this huge speech about the centrality and the importance of democracy. He's here to defend it, and Donald Trump is here for himself. Yes. And both Republicans and Democrats are centering January 6th. Brian Stelter stepped back and looked at it and said, look, polls show that January 6th conspiracy theories actually divide GOP voters.
Okay.
A great number of registered Republicans and independents don't parrot the party leader's lies about the insurrection. I say this is reason to have hope. For example, Brian Stelter says, and he has only in quotes, 37% of Republicans, quote, endorse the conspiracy theory that those who entered the Capitol were mostly people pretending to be Trump supporters. This is a CBS poll. The number should be lower than 37%.
You hope for that.
But it's notable the propaganda effort has had limited effect. So, again, it's hard to do numbers on podcasts.
Okay.
/ radio.
Say what they are.
They can be a little confusing. But here's the deal. Okay. When you asked Republicans, do you think that the people who forced their way into the Capitol were typical of most Trump supporters?
Oh. All right.
Republicans say 12%, but if you ask everybody, it's 39%.
Yeah, I can see that.
If not typical of most Trump supporters. Republicans say 51% say, yeah, they weren't typical Trump supporters. If you ask everybody, they say about 40% say they probably were.
Yeah, and I could see it's a sort of the same dynamic. I don't know what you would call it, but the same dynamic about the crime statistics.
Right.
Is crime out of control? Yeah, absolutely. Well, the numbers say it isn't.
Your house? Well, no.
Right. Or where do you have a job? No. But is it a recession? Yes. No. I don't. Right.
Crime's not out of control.
You've touched on that phenomenon
and
with the economy.
Really interesting question here. People who forced their way into the Capitol were people pretending to be Trump supporters.
Okay.
All right. If you ask everybody, that's what Stelter's getting at. If you ask everybody, it's like 21% of the population says that. How many people believe in UFOs? Probably a bigger number than that.
Yes.
Republicans, 37% think that these are people pretending to be Trump supporters. That's what he means by only 37%.
Yeah. Right. It is a scary number, but still.
Okay, because the new line from Trump and the Republicans, who are all falling in line behind him, is that, January 6th, I know you're seeing all these videos of, people pushing and shoving and stuff like that, but what you don't know is that these are all FBI people. These are all plants.
Right.
These are all people pretending to be Trump supporters. Okay, and Stelter's making the point that if you look, for example, do you approve or disapprove of people who forced their way into the Capitol. And you separate Republicans into MAGA Republicans and non-MAGA Republicans.
Yeah.
43% of MAGA Republicans approve of what happened on January 6th.
Even that's surprising.
Not a majority.
Yeah, not even a majority of MAGA.
That's what struck me.
Yeah.
You can't even get a majority of MAGA Republicans to approve of the actions. And the non-MAGA Republicans, only 22% say it was okay. That's where Elise Stefanik comes in and says, well, I have concerns about the treatment of January 6 hostages. That was her exact treatment. Kristen Welker on Meet the Press said to her, do you think it was a tragic day? Do you think the people who stormed the Capitol should be held responsible to the full extent of the law? Elise Stefanik said, I have concerns about the treatment of January 6 hostages. What kind of statement is that?
You were the January 6 hostage.
And how does that not get follow-up? First of all, I asked you whether it was a tragic day. And secondly, why are you calling them hostages? Or maybe, firstly, why are you calling them hostages?
I guess
But either way, you didn't answer my question. Let me ask you
a
follow-up question.
Like that, you have to be attuned to. I asked the question. I'm expecting an answer that has certain words in it.
Right. That's why Welker doesn't get off the hook, because she was surprised.
Okay.
Sorry.
All right. I can accept that as a accusation. I mean, people have been panning her performance, and I think she's relatively new. But not that I know, because I'm never watching. But
yeah, but that's what you said about Chuck Todd right before he left.
I did? I never.
I used to work with him. He's a good guy.
He was a decent guy when we were. He was young too. But for one thing,
we all were, weren't we?
Right. I mean, there's that. Was Chuck Todd a nice guy? Well, he would pick up the bagels at the store when we asked him to. But yeah, I always felt bad about people who are new on the job being caught by surprise by complete wackadoodle answers. But I guess at some point you better get used to it. Hi everybody, it's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time, just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We continue our discussion during the break, just pondering those crazy numbers that not even anything, not yet approaching a majority of MAGA voters approve of the whole principle of January 6th, if there was a principle. And yet, in a week from now, they're going to have the Iowa caucuses, and the expectation is that Trump runs away with it, which I guess means we should just set Iowa on fire. I don't know. But as it turns out, there's other people living there. But I guess they don't go to the caucuses. That's going to be some kind of condemnation of the crazies that show up at the caucus.
Well, look,
unless they're just ignoring the whole thing.
Show up at the caucus is going to be 7 degrees.
Yeah. Well, there is that problem. It's going to be the
coldest caucus that anybody can remember.
Wow. Really?
Yeah.
And so
usually it's in the 20s, 30s.
That's why they'll all
7
vote
degrees.
for Trump, I guess. They'll get out there and say, global warming my ass. And they'll use that old joke. And, all right, well, I guess it's just amazing that it's actually that unpopular. They're running on it anyway. And whoever shows up at Iowa caucuses is going to ratify that in overwhelming numbers. And
right now, if you were the New York Times, you'd write, "Here's why that's bad for Joe Biden." But here's
right.
what the actual numbers are. They're even more stark when you put them together.
All right.
And cleverly, they asked about those who forced their way into the Capitol, so you didn't have to get into the whole insurrection thing. So, of those who forced their way in the Capitol, do you approve or disapprove? MAGA approve is 43 and disapprove is 57. Non-MAGA is 22 and 79. I mean, overwhelmingly, non-MAGA people don't approve. Now, how many of the Republican Party are non-MAGA? Probably around 40-45%. Solid. That doesn't mean they're anti-Trump. It doesn't mean they won't fall into line. But again, in a close election, you only need to have 3 or 4 or 5% not show up.
If the results mean anything, if people are going to honor the outcome, then yes.
The outcome of the election or the outcome of the poll?
The election, really.
I mean, the outcome of the election is an issue. That's what we're talking about right here, right? But, do people really tell folks what they think when they answer these polls? Not really. It's just that you'd think that bias would push you to approve rather than disapprove. It's kind of an act of courage to tell a pollster, I don't really approve of what my party's doing.
I guess so. I mean,
so
really, why
those
not
numbers
say
may even be bigger? If
I'm
anything.
okay with that, unless it's like, there's the explanation, and we've discussed this in polling too, where people are like, well, that my actual position is I'm pro January 6th, but I'm embarrassed because I know that's bad, so I'm telling the pollster I'm against it, but really I'm okay with it. But that will be impossible to discern from the people who are, well, I am against it. That's just like I said, but like Mitt Romney, I want low taxes.
Right. Well, all I would say is you can argue about whether the polls are meaningful or not meaningful. I will tell you this. When election deniers like Carrie Lake and a whole host of others ran,
she's alive,
they lost.
Yes. Right.
Why?
So,
because some Republicans wouldn't vote for them.
They were telling the truth. Yeah. Amazing. What is happening with Republicans telling people the truth?
I'm just saying, so that's one of the reasons why I take that seriously. Norm Ornstein had a follow-up that Kristen Welker didn't. Kristen Welker did not say this. Norm Ornstein said this.
All right.
Hostages? Do you wake up every morning and say to yourself, how can I be even more despicable today? Now, I didn't expect Welker to say that.
Oh.
But that's like the normal reaction.
Yeah. I guess if you even hear the word, I mean, it's funny. It's I keep thinking of it like that's a newsy word. People talk about hostages all the time
because there are real hostages.
Yeah, right. And so I'm confused.
Folks, if you were listening to the rant about Axel Springer and all that, really the only tie-in to the whole Axel Springer story that we were briefly discussing and this January 6th stuff is hostages. That's the word association that gets you from one story to the other.
Guess so.
And I'm saying that Stefanik knew exactly what she was doing. As Marco Rubio likes to say, he knew exactly what he was doing.
I guess so.
She knew exactly what she was doing when she said that. How is that all playing? Politico puts it out, very clearly. Steve Shepard wrote a story. Why January 6th is a problem for Trump's campaign. This was written, by the way, on January 6th.
Oh, well, good.
Views of the attack have shifted among Republicans, but it remains toxic with the rest of the electorate. That's even before those poll numbers that I was talking about. But basically what he says is Republican voters have steadily grown more forgiving and in some cases more supportive of Donald Trump's attempt to subvert the election, but the rest of America hasn't joined them. And really that's the point. The entire body of politic, the entire body of political news is not what's going on with the GOP electorate, what's going on with the GOP primary. It's the general electorate. It's almost impossible to get people to focus on that in the media because Iowa, and it's coming up and it's going to be in a week and it's going to be 7 degrees and we have to report on every angle, including how cold it is. But the general election is what matters. And there's a whole lot of people out there who haven't joined the Republicans in trying to forget all of this stuff. And that's one of the reasons why they get so upset about January 6th discussions, be it January 6th committee, Mitt Romney saying, why are you focusing on January 6th? Because if you do, you may not vote for my party.
Okay.
Well, yeah, and there's a reason for that. And frankly, your party deserves not to get a vote.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. By the way, I had to look up. We keep referring to Axel Springer here, and I was confused
It's a company,
as well.
And he was a person.
Yes, that's the issue for me. I'm like, well, wait a second. Now you're talking about being having had to work his way around the Nazi era. Now he's not still with us, right? No, but the company is. And but I was also struck by, okay, well, so they own Business Insider. As it turns out, there's a whole enormous list of publications that they own, including some of the biggest papers in Europe. But down at the bottom of the list here, at least in Wikipedia, which I'm plagiarizing from, Business Insider is low down on the list, but then a couple notches down from there, I don't know what order this is in, is Politico.
Yeah.
So...
That was a big deal when they bought Politico, and whether or not they were going to force a conservative point of view onto Politico, which is, if anything, Republican-centric anyway.
Yeah. So any number of things.
I haven't really discerned any difference in how Politico covers stuff, even though Axel Springer bought them.
Seems more or less the same. It certainly didn't improve any, but didn't get any worse as far as I can tell. But so I don't know. There might be others confused about that too, because it is a name. It was a person, and the company is named that as well, like the Trump Organization, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I figured.
So speaking of Trump and organizations, which of course immediately word association reminds you of courts.
Okay. Yes.
As it should, because he's a crook and a fraud.
Release the Trump hostages.
A court. Finding is that he's also a rapist.
Yes,
and
that's
so that's
true.
not
they
liable.
found that.
The courts
found
that was in fact true.
Okay.
So he's going to be in court tomorrow because tomorrow is the appellate hearing on his bid for immunity, and he says he's going to be there.
Okay, but now we need to clarify
says,
which
appellate
one.
Courts really take a dim view of having press conferences on the steps of the courtroom. But guaranteed,
it does happen.
Donald Trump will have a press conference on this, or at least a press avail, as they like to call it, on the steps of the courtroom.
So that only partially clarified it. His bid for immunity where? Which court are we in?
I think it's the one that's dealing with anything that Chutkan does, and whether or not Chutkan shouldn't even put Trump on trial because Trump's immune.
Yeah.
So that goes to the appellate court.
We got one of those, and we got the...
That's the one we're talking about.
But we can't have... There's also another one that says, I'm immune from E. Jean Carroll's suit.
Right, that's different.
That's New York.
That would be New York.
Second
so
Circuit.
It would be a different district circuit.
Second.
Appellate. Yeah.
And then D.C. Circuit has its own circuit, D.C., because of how special and awesome it is.
Right.
Okay, so tomorrow is D.C. Circuit. All right, very good. Just wanted to know where the plane was going to land.
Important one. Although they're both important.
Yeah. All right, and they're both happening at the same time. We're just trying to keep it straight. And Axel is at neither one of them. I don't think he's dead.
No, he's dead.
Got it. I think I'm up to speed on this now.
Right.
Very good.
So going back to Politico, which is owned by Axel Springer.
Right. Release the Axel Springer hostages.
Everything is connected, right? So the findings of two polls released this week underscore the risk for the GOP in tapping Trump again, just as Republicans in Iowa and New Hampshire prepare to cast the first votes in the primary contest, especially in Iowa. They're likely to vote for Trump. I'm not sure what New Hampshire's going to do.
I don't know.
Democrats and independents still hold starkly negative views of January 6th, its participants in Trump's role. Majorities of Americans overall still believe now President Biden was elected legitimately, that Trump's guilty of trying to steal the election. The federal criminal charges against Trump are appropriate. That's background.
Oh, right.
Now, Trump may be running even with the unpopular Biden because they love to call Biden unpopular.
Why not?
Or leading him narrowly in the horse race. Trump's refusal to concede the last election and his actions leading up to the Capitol are significant liabilities for candidacy. By the way, so are these court convictions that may come up, and certainly court appearances that definitely are coming up. And it's not just a poll-based hypothetical. Only 14 months ago, voters in the midterms rejected the majority of 2020 election deniers, especially in battleground states, despite a political environment and generic ballot that otherwise favored Republicans. Remember that? Remember the vaunted red wave that didn't happen?
Yes, right. Well, that was Kevin McCarthy's fault.
So a Washington Post University of Maryland poll out this weekend show half of respondents believe the protesters who entered the Capitol were mostly violent, down only slightly from 54% 2 years ago. Now, these polls should always also ask, do you believe in UFOs, and do you have any idea who the president is?
Sure, why not?
They should, because if you can't answer those questions, why are we asking you about anything else?
Yeah, you need to know what kind of people are answering this.
They were violent. Well, did you see the video? I'm not sure. Ask me something about Taylor Swift. I know something about Taylor Swift.
Somehow. Yeah, that would be important context, too. But it's supposed to stand for itself. Where I guess we all stand around and say, can you believe these people?
Now, this is different than the CBS poll that I was going over with Brian Stelter and you. The majority of Republicans are deeply divided from the rest of the electorate on the false claim underpinning the January 6th attack that Biden's election wasn't legitimate. In a Suffolk University USA Today poll released this week, 63% of all voters said Biden was legitimately elected. That includes only 29% of Republicans, and 6 in 10 GOP voters, 59%, said he wasn't.
Why?
So nearly 6 in 10. Remember I said it was about 40%? It's about 40%.
Okay. That he wasn't.
40% are non-MAGA.
Okay.
Nearly 6 in 10 GOP voters think Biden was not legitimately elected. It's fair to say, okay, you are MAGA people.
Yeah,
but if you
that's
split
a scarier
40 from
number.
the party, 40% from the Republican Party, they can't possibly come close to winning elections. Now, that doesn't mean that every one of the 40% is going to vote for Biden.
No.
Or not vote for Trump. We don't know that. But I'm saying you're looking at a pool of people which is large enough to potentially matter a whole lot. And that's who you're talking to whenever you're talking about persuading people or not yelling at everybody. You have to make it clear we're talking about the 60% of MAGA Republicans, and Biden makes that perfectly clear. In fact, he said MAGA Republicans so often, reporters are not getting the, oh, my goodness, you said MAGA Republicans. Isn't that like saying deplorables? No. They identify themselves as such. It's 60% of the party. Biden is appealing to the 40%. He's identifying the 60%. That's perfectly legitimate. He's doing it. You're used to it now. You don't even call him out on it anymore.
So, but I'm thinking now about the two polls together side by side. So like 60% of Republicans are okay with identifying themselves as MAGA Republicans, but...
Well, they didn't specifically ask, are you a MAGA Republican? They asked the MAGA adjacent question, do you think Joe Biden was legitimately elected?
Yeah, okay. I suppose that's the real issue. So 60% of Republicans don't think he was legitimately elected, but only 37% of Republicans are okay with the activities, however you describe them, of January 6th.
Right.
Are we supposed to then, so some 20% said,
I'm
against.
I'm uncomfortable. I don't like the outcome.
Yeah, I didn't like the poo on the walls. That was bad. Something like, okay, well, it was, they were justified, but I wouldn't have done it. Is that kind of what they're saying?
Something like that.
All right.
I understand why they're angry, but I wouldn't have done it.
All right. I mean, it's not great either way. I mean, but
well,
it's an
you have
important
an entire
nuance
party
too.
that's been sucked into this. We know that. And we know that because they've been sucked in so deeply, that's why every Republican elected is a coward. We know that.
Yes, by definition.
We know why.
Yes.
They are afraid of their voters.
Mm-hmm.
Just simple as that. For various and sundry reasons. Some physical, some, how many votes am I going to get? Some, if I don't do this job, I have to go to work. I have to do, actual.
That's crazy. I've done that. That was terrible.
I can't do that. I'd rather do this. That kind of thing.
Yeah, I guess so. I just saw. Why did I see Mike Pence back in the news? Also, basically doing the same sort of thing. Like, hey, hey, January 6th was kind of rough for me and all, but still.
I wouldn't call it an insurrection. They just tried to kill me.
Yeah, whatever it was. Oh, I think he was attacking Biden generally about. I guess over the speech. Was
this as an insurrection?
Yeah.
But this was a situation where they actually were trying to hang. And one of his aides.
Yes.
One of Pence's aides.
Yeah.
Was denying what happened, decrying everything that Biden was doing. Pence was in danger of being hanged.
Yes, and he didn't want to get in
real physical danger of being hanged. And one of his aides is just denying all that. He said, that was nothing.
Yeah,
you're overreacting.
Right. It was kind of astonishing to see. But, I mean, that's Mike Pence for you. But, I mean, in addition to the whole chanting hang Mike Pence and setting up a gallows outside and putting that gallows on TV, everybody saw that one. There was also the incident in which he was... the Secret Service was looking to evacuate him from the building, and he was like, I'm not getting in the car with you because you might be under Donald Trump's command, and you'll kill me elsewhere. And now he's like, well, wasn't really a big deal. I'm attacking Joe Biden. He shouldn't be calling it that. I got to tell you, next time the other guys offer to hang Mike Pence, think about it.
I want to step back and look at the whole situation
Let him do
about what Trump did on January 6th. One helpful frame for this is the three-part view.
All right.
What he did beforehand, what he did during.
Oh, Trump, yes.
And what he did after.
Okay.
All right. And what he did before is debated. How much of setting this up was Trump responsible for? That'll be decided in court.
But Jack Smith's doing a great job laying that out.
And so did the January 6th committee.
Yes.
What did he do during? And we know that because there's video.
Right. Watching it on
we
TV.
need you to fight. We need you to go march to the Capitol. I'm going with you, and so on and so forth.
Right. Okay.
And whether that's protected political speech or not, again, the courts will decide. Mm-hmm. And then what he did after, which is nothing to stop the violence.
Yeah, I guess that's the TV part. Watching it on TV and then tweeting, "We love you. You're very special. Go home in peace."
Plus, new evidence that he was told, and this is where Pence comes into it again, that his lawyer friends and all were saying to him, not just Cassidy Hutchinson and Patsy Baloney, and others, were saying to him, you have to stop this. The potential for being, violent and bad things happening is huge.
Yeah. And
Trump did nothing. And according to published reports, one of his aides said to him, but they're trying to hang Mike Pence.
Yeah.
And Trump said, and I quote, so what?
Oh, okay. That's it.
That was reported over the weekend. That's, again, bringing Pence into it.
I don't think I saw so what comment. That's good.
Axel sprinkled to Pence. So the whole idea there is Pence was really in danger. Trump didn't care. That's part of what happened after that he's responsible for. Mm-hmm. Was it an insurrection? Look at what Trump did before, during, and after.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it was.
So
and
what?
He was responsible, and he liked what was going on.
Yes.
What was his state of mind? We don't know his state of mind. Yeah, we do. What is what his state of mind was?
I mean, it's not much of a mind, but it is a state. So I guess you got to take it. Mike Pence. I mean, I don't know what to say about the guy. Even his own brother didn't care that they were trying to murder him. So I suppose it's not a far leap for him to get to that.
But, having siblings, I totally understand. But I'm just saying. Okay. I'm allowed to do that. You're not allowed to do that.
Yeah, I guess so.
Right? That's basically the reaction.
Right. So he wanted to hang him in the basement as kids, but
but that's a different situation altogether. The thing is, everybody makes Mike Pence into a hero, and I say, you want to make Mike Pence into a hero, you have to look at what he did beforehand, what he did during, where he gets points,
right,
and what he's done after, which
I gotta tell
awful.
You. Your best shot at glory as a hero was to go get hanged, Mike. I mean, then everybody would have thought, it'd be very impolite for us to say that he was actually, going to capitulate. Well, he didn't get the chance. He got hanged. So now you're a hero. But you've blown it now. You avoided the hanging, and you said, it might not have been such a big deal. They were going to only lightly hang me. I would have survived.
Exactly.
The gallows would have fallen down.
Yeah.
Even though it looked pretty solid, quite honestly.
That was a solid attempt.
I mean, it would have worked.
Again, this is all going to play out in court. And even if, unlike Georgia, it's not televised, we're going to hear a lot about it. And so January 6th, again, Mitt Romney, This is going to play out week after week after week from now till November.
Yeah. Okay. And for Mitt Romney, who it wasn't really that big of a deal, plus something, I want low taxes. We could just roll out that videotape of him going, what? Where? When? What? Okay. Zoom.
So,
right along with Josh
Brian
Hawley.
Stelter again. January 6th receives outside attention. This is from the Pundit Roundup. In part because there's a concerted campaign led by a former president to deny and cover up what happened.
Yeah.
So his aides and others want to compare this to BLM and Antifa riots.
Okay, sure. Of which there were none.
Well, there were some riots.
Antifa. Well, like
Whether
the
it
World
was,
Bank meetings in
Seattle,
1992.
there were some Antifa riots.
Yes,
but
that's true.
There is no equivalent campaign of trying to cover up what happened. So, it's not equivalent.
Definitely
and
true.
Nice try, but no.
Okay. Yeah, pretty much. I think really everything post like those weird World Bank riots in the early 2000s.
Yeah, exactly.
Turns out, once again, all Republican accusations being confessions, a lot of the things that Republicans think of as Antifa or BLM riots are, in fact, provocateurs, which is why I guess they think that the FBI and Antifa dressed up as Trump supporters on January 6th, because we've been in the habit of dressing up as Antifa supporters and trying
Look
to...
at the Brooks Brothers riot in 2000.
Oh, well.
We know how these things work.
That they didn't even have to... That they dressed up as themselves, which is amazing.
Well, they dressed up as respectable people.
Right. Maybe that's what they mean. No, see, they were just pretending to be Bush supporters. Well, they were, because they were on the payroll. They didn't really care one way or the other about George Bush, and they dressed up like Republicans. That's true.
Sarah Longwell sums up Mitt Romney quite well here. She says, look, we'll stop talking constantly about January 6th when Republicans stop trying to make the guy who caused it president again.
Okay. Yeah.
Pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
You think it's behind you? The guy is running.
Mm-hmm.
Thomas Lecaque, historian, says, January 6th was an insurrection. Christian nationalists pushed for it hard on those terms. Trump can lie as much as he wants, and he will. Mm-hmm. And his followers can cry martyr and patriot, and I would add hostage, and they will. But it doesn't change what happened.
Yeah. I guess not.
And people are aware of it, and again, they may not be up on everything, but they know what's going on.
Yeah. Well, good. They should. It was a major event. I can't believe that there's anybody trying to put it behind them. And, we're still living in the middle of it and unsure now with I guess this reminds us that Stefanik, with her comments over the weekend, reminds us it's been 7 and will be 8. So going on, I guess you could say that's going on a decade since there was a peaceful transition of power in this country. I don't know where we live. I don't know what we've got, what kind of system we have in place, and whether it's going to matter on January 6, 2025, who got the most votes from where, whether the popular vote or the Electoral College. Nobody is certain. That it's been some time. And the last peaceful or relatively peaceful transfer of power was to Donald Trump. After that, I don't know what we've got. There was a transfer of power,
but it wasn't peaceful.
Wasn't all that peaceful. They had to, and it was among, broken glass and smeared feces and people in prison, and nobody really sure exactly what we're going to do with the last guy.
You name it, it happened.
Yeah, right. Computers, decorations. I'm surprised they didn't steal the mace. I wonder where that was at the time.
So here's a different, again, a point on how MAGA is now an acceptable thing to say. You can't say deplorable, but you can say MAGA. Trump and his MAGA allies turned their fire on Haley. Nikki Haley's doing well enough in New Hampshire that MAGA's getting upset. The Trump campaign and its allied super PAC are spending a combined $4.5 million on anti-Nikki Haley ads. Now,
I'm okay with this.
I was never of the school that said Nikki Haley is defending Trump because she wants to be his vice president. Maybe she does. Maybe she's incredibly ambitious. But I never took that seriously because I couldn't see Trump picking somebody who was running against him and challenging him.
Yeah, that's hard.
Who also has their own talents. I just couldn't see it. But these ads tell me he'll go with Stefanik a whole lot faster than he would go with Haley if he wants to pick a VP.
I can believe that.
He would pick a Romney McDaniel over Nikki Haley.
He probably would, and that's
because
kind of funny.
He wants somebody who's totally subservient to him.
Right.
He learned his lesson with Mike Pence.
Yeah.
Pence
he thought he got what he wanted.
Having a backbone, and he didn't want that. That's why it's so important that, as you pointed out at the very beginning of the show, Elise Stefanik was asked about whether or not she would certify the next election, and she hesitated.
Yes. She, absolutely hedged on that. And
that was her audition for Trump's VP pick.
Yeah. That's the clearest part. All right. Well, I believe that's probably true, and she probably believes that she's entitled to that because I think she went to Harvard. And
right. And then just so that we don't make the show entirely about January 6th in the last 30 seconds,
we didn't.
Here's
Harvard.
A different story. This is from Politico's playbook.
Axel Springer. All right.
We're going to say that forever now, right? Impeachment impetus. House Republicans are shifting away from a plan to impeach the president this year and instead setting their sights on a plan to swiftly impeach Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas early this year, as key swing district Republicans express fresh openness to the idea amid a recent surge of migrant crossings at the southern border.
Oh, wow.
The emerging plan is to do it through House Homeland Security Committee, not House Judiciary Committee. They don't say it, but why? Internal politics, they say. Senior Republicans are confident they'll have the votes to advance impeachment through the Homeland Security Committee, but it's not clear they'll have the votes in Judiciary. In other words, Jim Jordan's incompetent, and so they're going to do it through Homeland Security where they can control things a little better.
How interesting.
Or to put it differently, the attempt to impeach Biden has been a complete failure. And now they're taking the toys away from the kids and giving them to a bunch of different kids.
Yeah, well, yes, they're not much better, but that is interesting for a number of reasons, and I think the most interesting part about it is the idea that, Jim Jordan must be running around. I thought all important things to Republicans were supposed to run through me. I thought I made that clear.
Well, not only that.
What's going on around here?
Impeachment ordinarily runs through judiciary.
Yes, absolutely. Now, they'll do, an initial investigation at the Committee of Jurisdiction would make sense, but it's not clear that, well, I guess you can do it any way you want.
No, we've seen your work product. You ain't getting this one.
I guess so. It's pretty amazing. And I guess this maybe is the new speaker saying, actually, I'm in charge here, not Jim Jordan. I don't know if you guys knew that. All right.
Let's see how long that speaker lasts.
Yeah. See you Wednesday. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. All right, where to this time? Oh, I don't know. Could go any number of directions here. But one thing we forgot to mention, and then I mentioned to him during the break, and then we said, oh, well, it's a good thing we forgot to mention it because Joan should really cover this for us. And maybe tomorrow we'll get a chance to talk to Joan McCarter about it. But we should note for the record, perhaps nothing more than to say that big news over the weekend was, the Washington Post headline on it, for instance, is congressional leaders reach deal that would avert government shutdown, which would lead you to think, well, what would Joan talk about if she came on a Tuesday if there wasn't going to be a government shutdown? And part of the discussion, I think, is going to have to be, did they really reach a deal? Are they really going to avert a government shutdown? I guess you could still say that the headline is true, but congressional leaders have reached a deal that would avert a government shutdown, except for the fact that the deal isn't going to be approved by the rank and file, and so then there will be a government shutdown. Now, I don't know whether that's really the case or not. I am sure that the new Speaker of the House will be very interested in avoiding a shutdown if he can, but it may also lead to, and I saw these comments almost immediately, people on social media saying a countdown to another motion to vacate the chair if the new speaker has cut a deal that would avoid a government shutdown, because a lot of these guys are living for a government shutdown. But I don't know yet, because I don't yet know the details of the deal, and it's always possible that the deal will be so awful that while there are Democratic leaders on Capitol Hill interested in avoiding a government shutdown for various reasons, they may be either giving away too much or not entirely sure whether or not the other side is going to live up to the bargain, or whether the terms will be argued about later on, or maybe they are in fact okay with the various sacrifices made in the deal. But everything I've scanned so far indicates that all the concessions are on the border and migration front. But I did catch wind last night that there were also additional concessions, perhaps, on spending cuts, including tremendous spending cuts at the IRS, which always makes Republicans happy, and which were key parts of the Recovery Act. And it's so undermining one of the bigger legislative successes of the Biden administration as well. And that might be enough to consider it a victory for Republicans so that they go along with it. But we'll catch up with things possibly tomorrow and see if we can make some sense of things. Although I do feel like, well, maybe we ought to lay down the basics of it and assume that there will be further developments between now and then being tomorrow when we talk to Joan, so that rather than having to catch up on background information, then we'll be up to speed, and whatever horribleness will have emerged between now and then will be the focus of tomorrow's discussion. So here's the deal from Jacob Bogage. I don't know how he would pronounce it. Bogage. I don't believe I've seen that byline before. So welcome, Jacob, to the lineup here. He's writing for the Washington Post under that headline, Congress has a deal to fund the government and not much time to pass it. I guess the headline changed since it was in pocket. The original headline I saw was congressional leaders reach deal that would avert government shutdown. Maybe they're not so sure about that anymore. Congress has a deal to fund the government and not much time to pass it. The negotiated totals, the subheader tells us, would preserve funding for key domestic and social safety net programs despite GOP demands for cuts. So that would be a more democratic, sympathetic spin in that subheader. That is, sympathetic to the Democratic leaders on Capitol Hill who had to cut the deal, where they will likely still be criticized for sacrificing migrants and migrant families and border issues on the altar of avoiding a government shutdown. There's also on the upside, well, we saved certain social safety net programs from threatened cuts, and that was sweetener enough for us to, well, sacrifice migrant and migrant families, I guess would be the accusation. So here's the story as it's written here. Congressional leaders reached a $1.66 trillion agreement on Sunday to finance the federal government in 2024, preserving funding for key domestic and social safety net programs despite GOP demands to cut the budget. They'll cut it elsewhere. Now lawmakers are up against a stiff deadline to pass legislation to codify the deal and avert a partial government shutdown in less than 2 weeks. Remember, they were going to have a partial shutdown in January, and then a couple weeks later, the other part of the government that was still unfunded might then shut down. Funding runs out for roughly 20% of the government, including for essential programs such as some veterans assistance and food and drug safety services on January 19th. And money for the rest of the government runs out shortly after that on Groundhog Day, February 2nd. The agreement, announced jointly by Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and House Speaker Mike Johnson, will almost surely face vehement opposition from far-right House Republicans who had hoped to force steep budget cuts, and then they didn't get it, so let's have a shutdown. I fear there will ultimately be a deal that's bad for the country. It's bad for the American people. That's bad for the deficit and bad for the national debt, said Bad Bob Good of Virginia, chair of the arch-conservative House Freedom Caucus. That's what he said to the Washington Post last week. I hope it's not the case. I'm certainly trying to persuade Speaker Johnson otherwise, trying to persuade my Republican colleagues to stand with the Speaker in having his back to fight to cut spending year over year, to implement the policies that reverse the harm that's been done by the Biden, Pelosi, Schumer policies that are in place right now, whatever that even means. So We should fight for a shutdown, but Johnson's not fighting for shutdown. Yes, but we should fight for Johnson anyway, because reasons. Okay, so that makes no sense. The Freedom Caucus, in a statement on Sunday, called the agreement a total failure and totally unacceptable. So I guess this was good speaking before the announcement of the deal, but still. Anyway, the deal allows for $886.3 billion in defense spending, the leaders announced, and $772.7 billion in domestic discretionary spending. So, just so you have those numbers again, more than $100 billion more on defense than for domestic discretionary spending. Terrific. It rescinds $6.1 billion in coronavirus emergency spending authority, even though we're about to need it again, and accelerates cuts from $80 billion in new funding that the IRS was supposed to get under the 2022 Inflation Reduction Act, stripping $20 billion out of that total this year. The bipartisan funding framework congressional leaders have reached moves us one step closer to preventing a needless government shutdown and protecting important national priorities, President Biden said in a statement. It reflects the funding levels that I negotiated with both parties, except for $20 billion for the IRS, and signed into law last spring. It rejects deep cuts, except for that $20 billion, to programs for hardworking families that hardworking families count on. Okay, so that's just the social safety net ones. That's good. And provides a path to passing full-year funding bills that deliver for the American people and are free of any extreme policies, except for the $20 billion cuts to the IRS. Johnson, in a letter to GOP lawmakers, called the Sunday agreement the most favorable budget agreement Republicans have achieved in over a decade, because I achieved it. I guess already disagreements have emerged over the IRS funding provisions in the new agreement. The agency was supposed to get billions over 10 years to modernize and strengthen tax enforcement against high earners and major corporations, and Republicans don't want that. Schumer and Democrats say they agreed only to speed up cuts to the IRS, docking $20 billion in total from the agency. Johnson and Republicans say they negotiated an additional $10 billion clawback for a $30 billion cut. So what does that mean? How do you reconcile those two different numbers? The agreement mostly adheres to a deal reached by Biden and then Speaker Kevin McCarthy, who, last spring, to suspend the nation's debt limit in exchange for limiting discretionary spending to $1.59 trillion in 2024 with 1% growth in 2025. Because that represented a cut when taking inflation into account, Biden and McCarthy agreed to spend another $69 billion each year in a side deal, with some of that offset by repurposing existing funds. That's got to make no sense to anybody, I'm sure. But far-right House Republicans were unhappy with that arrangement and ousted McCarthy in October for adhering to the agreement, preserving its spending levels with help from Democratic votes. McCarthy resigned from Congress, by the way, at the end of 2023. Did we all catch that? I think I've forgotten that one. The bruising 3-week process in the fall to replace McCarthy chewed through 3 of the Republican conference's top leaders before the party settled on Johnson. He, like McCarthy, has struggled to maintain control over the raucous Republican House. From the far right, the Freedom Caucus has urged Congress to reset spending levels to pre-pandemic amounts and attach conservative policy amendments, including limits on abortion. Yeah, keep going with that one. And harsh immigration restrictions to spending legislation. Other Republicans, namely 18 GOP lawmakers from districts that Biden carried in the 2020 election, have called on Johnson to take a more pragmatic approach to budget cuts and stave off far-right attempts to include social policy in funding legislation. We have made clear to Speaker Mike Johnson that Democrats will not support including poison pill policy changes in any of the 12 appropriations bills put before Congress, Schumer and House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries said in a joint statement. So far, Johnson has tried to appease both camps. That's a great plan, with mixed results. For right-wingers, the Speaker has drawn a hard line on emergency assistance for Israel and Ukraine, spurning Biden's $106 billion spending request that covered aid for both war-stricken nations, humanitarian assistance, and border security resources. So now the hard right is going back to anti-Israel funding. So that's swing back to the 1980s, I guess, in that sense, although I'm not certain that they got that right. Johnson paired $14 billion for Israel with the same amount of cuts to the IRS, a move that nonpartisan analysts say would actually cost taxpayers more money by hampering the agency's ability to collect revenue. The measure passed the House and failed in the Democratic-controlled Senate, but Johnson has not secured the spending cuts for which the Freedom Caucus has argued. Instead, Johnson staggered government funding deadlines at the current spending levels, and the new agreement would continue those levels, a rate of spending that led conservatives to oust McCarthy. So, what will they do? Border security and immigration could pose a political hurdle for the new spending deal. Dozens of House Republicans last week argued that Johnson should attach demands for new immigration restrictions to any government funding deal, not just to the legislation for aid to Ukraine and Israel, where Biden is already seeking border funds. During a trip to the U.S.-Mexico border at Eagle Pass, Texas on Wednesday, some GOP lawmakers said they would not vote for federal financing unless Democrats agreed to pass H.R. 2, legislation to reinstate Trump-era immigration policies. The measure, which has already passed the House, would significantly limit migrants' ability to claim asylum, restart construction of a border wall, and cut into Biden's power to grant humanitarian parole to migrants. We shouldn't fund non-essential parts of the government until the border is secure. They give the last word there to Bad Bob Good for some strange reason. And, well, there you go. Interestingly here, Jacob Bogaj, whose name I don't know how to pronounce because I haven't seen it before and I wouldn't know even if I had. I thought he might be new, but he has. It says, I just wanted to point out that the bio at the bottom says that he covers economic policy in Congress for the Washington Post, where he's worked since 2015. But for some reason, I don't know that I've seen his byline before. And what have I been looking at? That he's been working there for like 8+ years, and I haven't figured it out yet. Okay, well, just so you know, he's no newbie. And yet, whatever. Okay, so that's the background with which we'll be working. I think I saw a couple of things in my email over the weekend from the Hill about this as well. But those are the basics, and I think they covered it pretty well over there. Good job, Jacob. You're no newbie, and you've laid the story out, I think, straightforwardly, and we'll see what Joan might be able to add to it tomorrow. So, let's see, on in other spaces that we've been covering. Let's see, where are we in the program here? At this point, could we start something super long? Should we start something super long, or should we head into some of the other smaller bore stories? Well, perhaps a couple of those, and then we should examine the longer story that I'm looking at. The New York Times kind of awakening to a story that we've touched on in various ways before, including some contributions or some reminders about from Rosalind McGregor about Hillsdale. Are they Hillsdale? Do they go by Hillsdale College or Hillsdale University for some reason? Hillsdale College, right? So, they're catching on to the role that Hillsdale plays and everything. But this is interesting, and I think indicative of, I guess, the fluidity of issues for MAGA Republicans, maybe in particular. But their piece is headlined, "How Hillsdale Got Mixed Up in the 2020 Election Plot." And I did see a number of people saying, mixed up in. What do you mean? They've been kind of central to it the whole time. But really, how central has Hillsdale College been to the election plot? They've been central to a lot of other things. But again, that's really an issue of the fluidity of the issues. I've seen a lot of people on, highly circulated on social media comment made over the weekend about how Republicans have kind of successfully, at least among themselves anyway, substituted. And they've stopped squawking so much about CRT. Not that it didn't work for them, but that they are swapping it out. Well, there's 3 letters in CRT. What if we swapped it for 3 completely different letters, DEI? And essentially saying, well, critical race theory is kind of the same thing, since we could never explain it to anybody and never really understood what it was anyway ourselves. And there was this one killer argument that nobody's teaching CRT. Well, what about DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion? Well, it's not so much that they're teaching it, but that they are practicing it everywhere, corporate environments, academic environments, because it makes sense, because we want to have a diverse population enjoy the fruits and benefits of the corporate workspace, the academic workspace, the products of both, etc. And it's a good idea, and equity and inclusion are supposed to be democratic values. But of course that means Republicans say, what, democratic values? We don't want any of those. But anyway, they've pretty seamlessly, except for the fact that, it's clunky and stupid, and real people who look at it say, I don't understand what you're talking about. I don't understand the provenance of DEI as a problem. Well, it has 3 letters. So, that's enough for Republicans. And if you thought that was clunky, consider how many people who are the influencers behind this drive to swap out DEI for CRT. Remember that they made their bones, to the extent that they made their bones at all, in swapping CRT for anger about mask mandates and vaccine mandates. We're against all the things that we should be doing to mitigate the pandemic for our own damn good. Okay, well, as it turns out, the weak-willed country that you're screaming about was actually ready to give up on the pandemic anyway, so they did. So what's the big problem? Why don't you shut up and go away? Oh, well, no, we'd rather just change issues and try to remain relevant. So we'll swap it for CRT. We're angry about masks. All right, no masks. All right, well, then we're angry about CRT. All right, well, there's actually no such thing as CRT in this school. Well, then DEI. Fine. I guess fine. But anyway, somehow Hillsdale has also found themselves, being exposed as being tied up in the election plot. But that was always true anyway, because they needed academics who would, make their stupid claims about election fraud. And they filled in the blanks both at Hillsdale and New College, for that matter, with people that they shipped out from Claremont Institute and other places where they were more established in making stupid claims about the election. And these think tanks and quasi-academic institutions are factories for turning out people with, trumped up credentials, in both senses of the word trumped up, and parking them at other places that want to transform themselves into garbage factories like the New College and Hillsdale. But anyway, big and involved story, and maybe we can turn to that during our last segment if we want to put our time in on that one. But first, we'll read a couple of other smaller bore stories that should be of some interest to it. Let's see. I wanted to take a look at Dan Frumkin's work at Press Watch. He brings up an interesting point under the headline of a January 6th conspiracy theory that hasn't been disproven. Did you realize that there was one? Well, it's Dan Frumkin. So what's it likely to be? Well, here it is. I have a January 6th conspiracy theory that, unlike the other one, has never been disproven. My theory is not that the government secretly instigated the insurrection, the one that the Republicans are trying to push, but rather that certain officials effectively allowed it to happen by insufficiently securing the Capitol. And this is actually not a bad one, and not even that much in the realm of theory, I guess I would say, because there's actually somewhat substantial proof for this. But yeah, a good reminder, there was something else going on that we should not lose sight of. Why they failed to appropriately prepare or respond remains a mystery. News coverage of this angle has been almost non-existent despite my entreaties over the years. Now, maybe part of it has been that people turn up their nose and walk away because they're like, oh yeah, the conspiracy theory that someone let it happen. But they've been poisoned against it because this is, well, I guess once again we could always resort to, well, every Republican accusation is a confession. But seeing this possibly, maybe they saw it coming as a possible accusation against Trump and Republicans and tried to inoculate themselves against it by jumping out and saying, yes, well, there were people who allowed it to happen. There's Nancy Pelosi and Democrats who allowed it to happen because they were super totally and uniquely and unilaterally in charge of security for Capitol Hill, despite the fact that at the time there was a Republican majority in the Senate. And these sorts of duties and responsibilities are shared as between the houses. And so at least, if not more, at least 50% of the responsibility for it would have fallen on Mitch McConnell and Republicans. But they don't actually like them, but they dislike them less than they dislike Nancy Pelosi. Let's blame it on her and say Democrats let it happen. But as it happens, Dan has some information that there were other people responsible for security at Capitol Hill, not just on Capitol Hill. But what about if Capitol Hill, for whatever reason, fails to be able to establish its own defense? Shouldn't there have been some sort of executive response to the emergency in Washington? And of course, he's reminding us, no, there wasn't. And that was intentional too, because Donald Trump wanted this to be going on. He was hoping it would go on. He was directing people to undertake this insurgency against the Capitol. And of course, remember, he felt perfectly safe in all of it. They're not here to hurt me. That's why he wanted the metal detectors removed around the ellipse. That's why there was no particular security activity going on at the White House during a moment when, the government faced live violent insurrection. Nothing happening 1 mile down the road at the White House because they were White House troops assaulting the Capitol. Of course, they weren't going to guard the White House. We're the ones doing the assaulting. Well, anyway, Dan Frumkin describes it this way, continuing with his story. Frontline personnel in any number of federal and law enforcement agencies were well aware of the chatter on social media about attacking the Capitol. It was all there in plain sight, all of this linked here, but none of their superiors jumped into action. This is, of course, Be There Will Be Wild. This is the sale online of Civil War January 6, 2021 t-shirts. This is discussion online of, hey, does anyone want to help me bring my materials for building a gallows outside of the Capitol? Just openly asking whether or not anyone would help with that activity. I mean, come on. So still, nobody jumped into action. There were innumerable points of failure. Why? Was it just a coincidence? He asks. The January 6th Congressional Committee intentionally avoided a serious investigation of the lapses of security on that day in order to keep the focus on Trump's culpability. But did they miss another area of Trump culpability? Who knows? There was that danger where, we don't want to focus on the security lapses because the Republicans are prepared to try to lay at Democratic feet. But maybe they should have plowed ahead and said, let them try, because there's a much better story about federal officials in the executive branch deciding to let it go forward than there is about Capitol Hill Democrats allowing it to happen. The foremost point of failure was, of course, the Capitol Police. And I suppose there, too, they were prominent witnesses before the January 6th committee. And so it was, I suppose, impolitic for them at that point to be attacking them as the cause of security lapses. But the foremost point of failure was the Capitol Police, whose leadership, particularly its then chief, Steve Sund, ignored a January 3rd memo from their own intelligence team. That memo explicitly warned that white supremacists, militia members, and others who actively promote violence, that's a quote, had been summoned by Trump and could create, quote, significantly dangerous situations for law enforcement and the general public alike, unquote, because, more quotes, unlike previous post-election protests, Congress itself is the target on the 6th. Chief Sund ordered the perimeter defined with bike racks, which are only effective for protests where most people are law-abiding. They do nothing to stop a horde. In fact, they can get turned into weapons to use against police, as they were. Incredibly, Sund actually ordered the removal of some bike racks on late January 5th. How do you like that? For reasons that some of his colleagues considered suspect. What might they have been? Well, first, some music. If he had put up a fence instead, the Capitol would never have been sacked. Sund inexcusably failed to prepare his officers with riot gear. We remember that. And despite his insistence that he was getting all hands on deck, he didn't even cancel officers' days off. There was no backup plan. Did Sund ever discuss his plans with the Trump White House? Nobody's asked him, as far as I can tell. That does seem like a lapse, doesn't it? Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We'll continue on with the reading of Dan Frumkin's Press Watchers entry here about his reminder of the failures of security on January 6th that extend not just to the Capitol Police and officials on Capitol Hill, but throughout the federal government, which mysteriously, for some reason, despite the fact that it was the executive branch planning the January 6th gatherings and riot, that mysteriously somehow the federal branch, the federal government at the command of the chief insurgent himself, got out of the way in every possible instance of the insurrection, and golly, no one is asking those questions for some reason. Is it a conspiracy theory, or was it, well, I mean, he's been accused of conspiracy to launch this insurrection against the United States on January 6th, and maybe this was all just part of it. Is it a conspiracy theory, or is it just uncharged elements of the conspiracy that belong in the total package here of the telling the more complete story? So where do we leave off? There was, of course, the strange and so far inexplicable decision by the chief of the Capitol Police at the time to establish a perimeter with bike racks, which wasn't really adequate to the task as far as they understood it. They were being told that there were some fairly raucous and violent people coming, and bike racks weren't going to do very much, and a fence might have done some better work, but they didn't put the fencing out, and indeed, even the bike racks that they put out, some of them were removed at the last minute on January 5th. The police weren't prepared with their riot gear. I remember at the time hearing the stories that the riot gear, once they realized they needed it, was all locked up on a bus somewhere, that they then, oh golly, we don't even have the keys to the bus somehow. What? Not even sure how that came about. Then the question, so did the chief of the Capitol Police discuss any plans with the Trump White House? Nobody has asked him, as far as I can tell. That would be an interesting answer, because if they discussed it, you would want to know, well, what did you discuss? Because we know that the next day, Trump is having or demanding that metal detectors be removed. I don't think they actually went ahead with that and honored his request there. And then, of course, saying that he was going to lead a march to the Capitol, apparently actually attempting to get the Secret Service to bring him to the Capitol. And then, of course, my own hobby horse, the tweets from White House pool reporter for the day, Ann Guerin of the Washington Post, noting for the record that there was no indication of any kind of any unusual activity at the White House in the middle of an armed insurrection against the United States government, which seems like an odd thing to be doing. Now, back to the way Dan Frumkin is telling it, top U.S. Army officials were also culpable. They chose not to put up a fence or send in the National Guard ahead of time. And then on the day itself, two top generals, one of whom is the brother of notorious international spy Michael Flynn, a key figure in Trump's attempted coup, by the way, stalled for time, slowing the response. And then they lied about it to Congress. Were they operating under orders? And if so, from whom? There were command posts set up all over Washington in the days before January 6th, including 2 for the FBI alone, but there was no FBI presence in the crowd to alert authorities to the rising menace. This despite the fact that, of course, MAGA supporters believe that they were all FBI. In fact, more than half an hour into the storming of the Capitol, neither the FBI command centers, and neither of the FBI command centers had raised any alarm, assuring Justice Department officials that the Capitol Police had everything under control. Weren't they even paying attention? Like, it was on TV that people had smashed their way into the Capitol, and so what's going on, FBI command posts? What? We're fine. How are you? TK421. Why aren't you at your post? Little weapons malfunction. No problem. Okay. The most innocent explanation is gross incompetence at every level of the government. Uh-oh. That's not so great, but that doesn't hold water. The most likely explanation is that military and law enforcement leaders simply could not imagine that white people and or Trump supporters, same thing generally, could pose a danger to the country. So they shrugged off any concerns. That would be gross, as well as negligence. But there was there something else at play? Did any of these officials consciously choose not to act or to underreact because they were sympathetic to the rioters or out of fear of angering Trump? Or were they instructed to stand down despite rather obvious potential consequences? Who gave the order to stand down? Who gave the stand down orders? However you want to phrase it on that one. That was the old Benghazi cry, as I recall, right? Well, this time they were out with their accusations before they were giving their confessions. Anyway, if the latter, who issued those instructions? That's a good question. They used to think it was a good question back in Benghazi days. Anyway, perhaps someday we'll find out. But today, 3 years later, we simply have no idea. So, something to think about, an angle of inquiry that has been neglected up to this point. All right, let's see. Other bits and pieces of news that we have to catch you up with. You obviously would have anticipated this coming, so it won't be a surprise. But officially, the New York Times can be the source to tell you that just prior to the weekend, we found out that the Supreme Court of the United States, the big one, will decide whether Trump is eligible for the Colorado ballot. The Colorado Supreme Court, of course, ruled last month that the former president could not appear on the state's Republican primary ballot because he had engaged in an insurrection. Wow, I hadn't heard about that one. Is that right? Adam Liptak reporting for the New York Times on this one. Byline we've heard 100 times. The Supreme Court agreed on Friday to decide whether former President Donald J. Trump is eligible for Colorado's Republican primary ballot, thrusting the justices into a pivotal role that could alter the course of this year's presidential election. Just where they want to be, right? The sweep of the court's ruling is likely to be broad. It will probably resolve not only whether Mr. Trump may appear on the Colorado primary ballot after the state's top court declared that he had engaged in an insurrection in his efforts to subvert the 2020 election, but it will most likely also determine his eligibility to run in the general election and to hold office at all. Not since Bush v. Gore in the 2000 decision, and I'm sure they're real happy about that handed the presidency to George W. Bush has the Supreme Court taken such a central role in an election for the nation's highest office. The case will be argued on February 8th. That's, I guess, we would say a month from today because it's January 8th, and the court will probably decide it quickly. The Colorado Republican Party has urged the justices to rule by March 5th, when many states, including Colorado, hold those primaries. The number of challenges to Trump's eligibility across the country can only have added pressure on the court to hear the Colorado case, as they underscored the need for a nationwide resolution to the question. The case is one of several involving or affecting Mr. Trump on the court's docket on the horizon. An appeals court will hear arguments on Tuesday, tomorrow, the one Greg mentioned, on whether he has absolute immunity from prosecution, and the losing side is all but certain to appeal. And should we double check that we had the right court in that one? There's a link here. But yes, the headline reads that the special counsel is asking the Supreme Court to decide if Trump is immune from prosecution. Remember that the Supreme Court decided not to take that on probably because the circuit court was going to be handling that one. So there, in that case, yes, they do mean the D.C. Circuit Court, not the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, which was considering the same claim in a different case against Trump. He just thinks he's got absolute immunity in everything. But the New York and Second Circuit handling the E. Jean Carroll case, the civil trial against him. Anyway, Trump asked the Supreme Court to intervene after Colorado's top court disqualified him from the ballot last month. That decision is on hold while the justices consider the matter. Oh, there was a little bit of scheduling here. Not only will the D.C. Circuit hear arguments on Tuesday about absolute immunity, but the losing side is all but certain to appeal. And the court has already said that it will rule on the scope of a central charge in the federal election interference case in a decision expected by June. Now, back to the situation here. Jena Griswold, Colorado Secretary of State, pressed the Supreme Court to act fast. Coloradans and the American people deserve clarity on whether someone who engaged in insurrection may run for the country's highest office, she said in a statement, putting it pretty squarely. I don't know. I think that's probably all we need to read from this. We've been over the rest of the issues. I just wanted to note for the record that on Friday, post-show, we got official word that the court is ready to hear this case. And so put it on your calendar as they put it on their docket. You would almost certainly have anticipated that was going to be the case, but there you have it. All right, let's see. There are a couple other pieces that might be of some interest here. I got to kind of scan down just to get to different aspects of what's happening in court. Let's see. Did we read this one? This should have been obvious as well, but I think I mentioned this on Friday in passing, right at the end of the show when we were talking with Armando about things. But this is a rather interesting ploy in court, but we didn't get to develop it fully on the show. It's just, I asked Armando, have you heard about that one? He said, oh yeah, I did. This is a piece from Ryan Riley at NBC News. Trump team seeks to grind D.C. election interference trial to a complete stop. There too, the headline says, oh, I know that. Nothing new under the sun. Who cares? I mean, not who cares, but I haven't learned anything from that. I know that that's always been the plan, to grind any trial of any kind against Trump to a complete stop. So what makes this one special? The audacity, as usual. Trump's lawyers want the special counsel, Jack Smith, to be held in contempt. Why? For providing them with discovery material and filing motions ahead of deadlines. You can't have any of that. So obviously, contempt of court. Well, garbage idea, garbage charge, but everybody's got to stop and take out the garbage now. Is it a plausible claim? No. Will it take time to adjudicate? Not a whole lot, but again, they're just trying to ruin everything. And any day that they can suspend activity and progress towards actually resolving the issues of the trial is a good day for them. Here's the deal. Attorneys for former President Donald Trump are once again pushing to delay his federal election interference trial, telling a judge that special counsel Jack Smith and federal prosecutors should be held in contempt for filing motions ahead of deadlines and for continuing to provide Trump's team with discovery. Now, what's the kernel of truth in that? I mean, because the claim, you keep giving us information that we could be using for our defense by telling us what the prosecution is going to be bringing forward as evidence? How dare you? Right. Well, how do you get to where that's a bad thing? Well, okay, here it is. John Lauro, a Trump attorney who has argued that Trump's election interference trial should be delayed until 2026, filed a motion Thursday calling for the special counsel to be held in contempt for what Lauro called an unlawful production of discovery, accusing federal prosecutors of partisan-driven misconduct. Now, no comment from the special counsel's office, but how do you get to where giving the Trump team information about how the prosecutors plan to proceed is unlawful and a contempt of court? Well, here we go. Lauro argues that Smith cannot keep filing because U.S. District Judge Tanya Chutkan paused proceedings in the case in December while an appeals court considers Trump's contention that he can't be prosecuted because of presidential immunity through the March 4th trial dates, though the March 4th trial date is still on the books. Okay, so we mangled things a little bit. What's happening? Well, they're saying Judge Chutkan paused proceedings. So you can't just keep filing motions and giving us discovery. It's a pause. Well, so what? I mean, the judge is saying, well, I'm pausing things and I'm not going to consider whether or not I'm going to issue any rulings on those things until we resolve those. But in the meantime, can the special counsel ask for other things? Yeah, they can ask. I just won't act on them. Can they hand over to the defense information that is necessary for the trial? Yeah, they can hand it over. You could look at it. You could set it aside and decide to wait, and that's probably what they're doing. We're not going to even look at it because there was a pause. And then when things are unpaused, we'll ask for a delay again when they're on pause because they'll say, well, we need time to read these items that have been handed over to us as part of the discovery. Well, but you had all the time in the world to read those. They were produced to you in late December, early January. Why is it that on March 4th you still haven't read these things? And their claim will be, but you paused everything. Well, I paused my work on it, not your work on it. Yeah, but we thought you meant everything. Well, why? I don't know, because I'm an idiot. But the argument is going to be there was a pause. I thought you meant that everybody had to stop working. No, that's not what the pause is. The pause is the court isn't set to move forward on March 4th. We may change our mind later on, or we may delay the start of the trial later on. But in the meantime, you still have an obligation to get yourself ready for trial. That's not what pausing the trial means. But, like everything else, they're making claims out there. Well, I have absolute immunity. Or even if I don't have absolute immunity, what was one of the more amazing claims? Oh, yes, right. The double jeopardy claims, or because I was acquitted in my trial, my impeachment trial in the Senate, that means, one, I can't be charged criminally, and also it means something else, too. I can't even remember what other stupid thing he was trying to claim based on that. But these most outlandish interpretations of things. What was it? Not only that, how did he put it? It was so crazy, I can't even remember now. But being acquitted by the Senate meant, well, yeah, you know what? I have to read it verbatim. I can't, paraphrase it. Anyway, I'll just go on here with Ryan Riley's point here. So Lauro is saying because there was a pause, any further work being done by the prosecution, not only should it mean that I'm not responsible for reading it or being prepared with it by March 4th, if it comes to that, but that it's a contempt of court situation. For him to keep providing information about this case when there's a pause, she said there was a pause. You're not pausing. That's obviously contempt of court. Well, it's nothing of the sort, of course, but that's just one more wrench that they're looking to throw into the gears here. But in that order, as they point out here, making the point that we just made, Chutkan made clear that the deadlines were merely held in abeyance rather than permanently vacated, and noted that the purpose of the stay was for the benefit of Trump's team so as not to impose additional burdens of litigation on Trump as he pursued the appeal. There was nothing in the order that barred federal prosecutors from continuing to proactively provide discovery or file motions even though the deadlines were lifted. She may not act on their motions, but there's no problem with filing them. I'll get to them when I get to them. Your claim is that because I said I was no longer obligated to rule on their motions by a certain deadline, that they can no longer make any motions. That just doesn't follow, guys. Chutkan explicitly raised the possibility that she would retain deadlines, in fact, if the appeals court rejects Trump's presidential immunity claim. And remember, they're arguing that starting tomorrow. So, if jurisdiction is returned to this court, in other words, if tomorrow's arguments result in the D.C. Circuit saying, no, there's no such thing as absolute presidential immunity, and it was stupid of you to even ask. Never mind. Dismissed. Goodbye. Tomorrow we'll say no to this and resume your trial. And as a matter of fact, March 4th is just fine. There's still plenty of time, 2 months for them to get ready. They should have been reading all this discovery material anyway and getting ready to respond to Smith's motions. There's no excuse for it. And the temporary stay in proceedings was just that. They were duly warned by Judge Chutkan that everything could resume just as before, and they chose to ignore that. That's their problem. And if it comes to the detriment of their client, let their client sue them later on. Anyway, if jurisdiction is returned to this court, it will, consistent with its duty to ensure both a speedy trial and fairness for all parties, consider at that time whether to retain or continue the dates of any still future deadlines and proceedings, including the trial scheduled for March 4th, 2024. Chutkan wrote there. We suffer from a little bit of jargon here. Continue is a term of art, I guess, for legal practice. And so when they say things like whether to retain or continue the dates, I mean, what they mean here is, should we keep the trial scheduled for March 4th, i.e. retain the March 4th date, or continue, which in lay terms sounds like it means the same thing, but a continuance here would be, well, this is, if we delayed it from March 4th to April 4th, that would be a continuance to do that. So either retain March 4th or not retain it by continuing at some later date. But that is all still up in the air. In other words, the judge said we could still very well come back and do March 4th, notwithstanding the appeal to the D.C. Circuit. Depending how quickly they turn things around and what they decide to do, we might go March 4th, we might go later. No, it can't be. It can only be one thing. And as a matter of fact, not only is it that one thing, but it would be contempt of court to insist that it might possibly be the other thing, or not even insist, just give us information. I mean, that I think, I don't know, well, who knows whether it's sanctionable or not, but that'll just complicate things at this point if they work on or attempt to impose sanctions ahead of time, maybe post-trial. Anyway, back to the conclusion of the article here. Smith's team stated last month, ahead of Chutkan's order staying the proceedings, that it would meet every deadline, even if those deadlines were temporarily lifted. To help ensure that trial proceeds promptly if the court's order is affirmed, during the pendency of the defendant's appeal, the government will meet every pretrial deadline that the court has set for it. Then, as soon as the mandate returns, the court can promptly resolve any remaining issues and start trial. Smith's office used similar language in motions that they filed on December 18th and 27th. Delaying the trial as long as possible is a core component of Trump's legal strategy, and Trump's latest legal filing appears to have been closely coordinated with the Trump campaign for maximum media exposure. They didn't get very much. Moments after it was filed, the Trump campaign issued a statement calling Smith deranged, with a capital D, of course, and describing the longtime federal prosecutor, who has overseen prosecutions of Democrats John Edwards and Bob Menendez, as a henchman for President Joe Biden, somehow. The America First Policy Institute, a Trump-affiliated group, previously pointed to the failed prosecutions of Edwards and Menendez as evidence of Smith's, quote, troubling record of failed, botched, and/or suspect prosecutions against prominent public figures, which you'd think would be to the advantage of Trump, hoping that his prosecution, too, would be somehow incompetent. I don't really know why they thought that would work for them. The Trump campaign statement maintained that Trump was, quote, carrying out his duty as president to investigate the rigged and stolen 2020 presidential election, rather than, as Smith's team contends, in pursuit of his own personal interest in securing a second term in office, to which he had not been elected. Well, that's rather something, to say the least, rather startling. It's sometimes surprising what they will come up with to make, to pile up more garbage in front of the exits from the court system. All right, let's see, a couple of other items that might be of interest. Why not head over here just for a twist in proceedings, slightly different bent on things. I thought a very interesting piece from Philip Bump, whose name we do frequently call here, from the Washington Post. The high cost of DeSantis's presidential bid? ? What is that high cost of DeSantis's presidential bid? Not just the money he's burning, but vaccine disinformation. Or rather, misinformation is the word that he uses, or that gets used in the title here. What's happening? Joseph Ladapo, whose name we mentioned the other day, the top public health official in Florida, will not be persuaded that the vaccines created to combat coronavirus are safe. That's just DeSantis policy. We can no longer have that. When he hyped the idea that vaccines were dangerous in October of 2022, independent experts, at times gently, but often not, pointed out that his arguments were baseless or misinformed. But Ladapo was unabashed. He appeared a few weeks later on a podcast that had elevated the QAnon conspiracy to argue his position and attack COVID-19 responses more broadly, saying a mask mandate was a, quote, manipulative, destructive, divisive policy that was implemented for the purpose of control and maintaining control. Well, this wasn't new exactly, but in March of 2022, 6 months into his tenure, he blasted officials in charge of the response, demanding that Floridians not let these people get away with it. And this guy's still in office, by the way. But this goes hand in hand with the recent report that some 17,000 lives may have been lost due to hydroxychloroquine disinformation, which, by the way, the Alex Jones people have already converted into 17 million people killed by the vaccine, in their view, right? So they borrowed the number, added some extra zeros, and said it was the other thing that had killed them, as opposed to not the garbage treatment, but the actual treatment. Great. Just wonderful. On Wednesday, I guess, of last week, Ladapo went further in his efforts to kneecap vaccine adoption. His office released a statement announcing that he was calling for vaccines using mRNA technology, like those from Pfizer and Moderna, to be curtailed, citing a debunked concern about the effects on recipients' DNA. One of the dumbest claims yet made on this thing. Again, a large body of research indicates that these vaccines are safe and have been important in reducing the COVID-19 death toll. An analysis completed by KFF in early 2022 estimated that 234,000 of the deaths from COVID-19 to that point might have been prevented had the deceased been vaccinated. Thousands of people are still dying from COVID-19 each month, but the ratio between infections and deaths has plummeted since vaccines became widely available. It hasn't plummeted all that far, quite honestly, in part because of the changes to the dominant strains that are circulating. By contrast, there is no evidence that the vaccines pose a significant widespread danger. In another state, having a top official, a health official, making recommendations at odds with the broader medical community and framing those recommendations in the context of a dispute rooted in politics might trigger reconsideration of the official's position. But this is Florida, domain of Governor Ron DeSantis, who appointed Ladapo and who has made a concerted effort to be the face of rejecting expert consensus on COVID-19 responses. Why? In part, clearly, because he wanted to be the Republican nominee for president. Polling from KFF published in November reinforces the extent to which uptake of the coronavirus vaccines is linked to partisanship. That has been the case for a long time. KFF data in November of 2021 showed that the main divide in getting vaccinated was rooted in partisanship. While half of Americans said late last year that they would get or had gotten the newest iteration of vaccines, only a quarter of Republicans indicated their intent to do so. The path to this point has been well documented, but it's worth reiterating. When the first confirmed case of coronavirus arrived in the United States in early 2020, President Trump was eager to dismiss it as a non-issue. That soon became indefensible, so Trump and state governors, including DeSantis, endorsed efforts to limit the spread of disease. But Trump, facing voters that November, was worried about the effect on the economy from mitigation measures. So he began undermining medical experts, insisting once again that the country was ready to move past the pandemic. And he spent the last months of his presidency focused heavily on rejecting his loss, but carved out some time to promote the vaccines that his administration had helped ensure were developed quickly. But most of the rollout of those vaccines fell to his successor, President Biden, meaning that government-backed promotion of vaccines got a new Democratic veneer. Hence, now running for the Republican nomination as an anti-vaccination candidate for DeSantis. Amazing.
You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Anyway, one thing you should definitely take away from this is a glance at the chart that is included in Bump's piece here, noting the difference not only between Biden voters and Americans in general on vaccine uptake and the toll of the pandemic, but even worse, in Florida. Anyway, handing it off to Justice Putnam. We'll see you again tomorrow.